Hello class, this is Marcella again, and for today's lecture we're going to be talking about intermediate treatments. So the goals for this lecture include being able to describe the different types of intermediate treatments and their associated goals, and to also understand when and why you may use different intermediate treatment, what situations, when in time, what's going on. So what is an intermediate treatment? So an intermediate treatment is any treatment or tending designed to enhance growth, quality, vigor, and composition of the stand after establishment or regeneration and prior to the final harvest. So we have the three parts of a silvicultural system. We have regeneration, tending, and harvesting. And just like the definition here says, an intermediate treatment tending, so it's that middle part. We're doing something to improve the quality, the composition, something. We're doing something to improve that. And we can see in this definition, the Dictionary of Forestry points us also to stand improvement. So what is stand improvement? Stand improvement is an intermediate treatment made to improve the composition, structure, condition, health, and growth of even or uneven age stand. So some examples, we've already kind of covered some of these examples, which include release treatments such as thinning, and also prescribed burns in a thin stand. So we'll cover some more examples, but you already have some of these tools in your silvicultural toolbox when we talk about intermediate treatments. So some of them, just like I mentioned, we've talked about thinning, so we've talked about that. Another part of an intermediate treatment is release. And release is pretty specific to when that's happening. So a treatment designed to free young trees. So this is a key, and we'll go into some more definitions in a second, from undesirable, usually overtopped competing vegetation. And these treatments include cleaning, liberation, and weeding. So we're going to go into these three different types of release. But a main thing to take away from the release, free young trees. So that's an important part of this definition. A release frees young trees. So early growth. So this is a picture I took from southern Minnesota on DNR land. And what are you looking at? What do you see? Well, it may be hard to see, but what you're looking at is the Minnesota DNR in southern Minnesota has been acquiring old agricultural land. And this is one example. So there's actually a ton of different trees out there, but there's also a lot of invasives. So there's walnuts, there's different oaks, there's hickory, and they're all maybe about 3 to 5 feet tall, and they're competing with invasive species such as cheatgrass and other things that are right now impacting them. So we're going to talk about how we can use release treatments, how release treatments can be used in this example. So this is a really good example. These are young trees, and we want to remove competing vegetation. So release objectives. I want you to pause the lecture and think of an objective, at least one objective, for why we might use release. As we unpause the lecture, let's look at it. So release, the broad overview, broad goal is to influence composition or structure of your stand from a very early age. So those are getting at that big picture. We want to influence structure, we want to influence composition. Here are some of the specifics. We can do this by protecting trees from injuries and suppression by other plants, improving the species quality and composition, reducing interference from more rapidly developed older trees, reducing crowding, and enhancing growth and development of select species. So there's different types of release treatments, and we saw that in the definition. So one type of release treatment is weeding, and weeding is a release treatment in the stand not past the sapling stage that eliminates or suppresses undesirable vegetation regardless of crown position. So not past the sapling stage. These are young trees again. And here's an example of a person with a weed whacker going out to remove and release young trees. Weeding can be done in a few ways. So here's another example of mechanical weeding. Again, removing undesirable vegetation. Can also be done with chemical or herbicide. And for more details, there's a lot of information on herbicides and herbicide uses. There's an extension website to if you're interested in more information. Fire. Fire can also be a tool, and this is an example of a dormant season prescribed fire in mixed oak forest. Again, weeding possibly undesirable growth from young saplings. So what are you hoping to do? What are you hoping to do with this? You're hoping to decrease competition between trees and weeds. And weeds are in quotation because weeds, in the traditional sense, they may not be invasive. A weed just may be something that you don't want. It's something you don't like. And then, so that could be other species. So in an oak stand, your weeds may be maple species coming in. That's an example. So, just like this, removing sprouting hardwoods in a pine plantation. So your goal is to remove these trees and to increase growth. And there's a lot of examples of this occurring in different areas, from Norway spruce to longleaf pine to Douglas fir. Cleaning is a different type of release treatment, and it's made in an age class, again, not past the sapling stage. So release treatments are young stands, young cohorts to free favored trees from less desirable individuals of the same age class that overtop them or are likely to do so. So removing trees from the same age class. So while not a tree, Oriental bittersweet may have developed in your stand and may be approximately the same age as the trees that you're trying to regenerate. So same age class, but it may just be impacting your regeneration because it's a vine, it's invasive, it can crawl, it can decrease growth. So you may choose to clean this up to remove this. So some implementations include, you can also clean, so again, we're looking at the same age class. So maybe you had an establishment period. So maybe it's in a shelter wood and you wanted species A, but you got species A and B. So you might clean out species B, and that includes mowing, something like foliar spray, so herbicide. You could broadcast herbicides or spot treatments. Liberation cut is a release treatment made in a stand not past the sapling stage to free the favored trees from competition with older overtopping trees. So the big difference between our liberation, our cleaning, and our weeding is where those competition is coming from, whether it's from the same age class or, in this case, an older cohort, older overtopping trees. So we see in this example, we have trees that are overtopping, we remove those, and that is our liberation cut. So that can look a lot like a shelterwood cut, right? However, there's some big difference, and those differences come back to your goals. So with a shelterwood, the trees that are in that overstory position, in that overwood, those are good quality trees that you chose to leave. You chose to leave them to provide seed and shade. And the goal of this kind of harvest is to regenerate. So you want to regenerate a new stand. Whereas a liberation cut, you already have the regeneration. This is not a regeneration cut. This is tending. So the focus of this is not regeneration. You are focused on regeneration here. You're not focused on regeneration with your liberation cut. This is an intermediate treatment focused on improving your regeneration. You are tending. So it comes back to your goals. Why were those trees there, and why are you removing them? So for any of these intermediate treatments, economics is a consideration. So you have to decide, will these treatments pay for themselves? And we're not going to get into the economics of how these things are calculated, how you weight this payment into the future. But economics are a consideration. So improvement cutting is the removal of less desirable trees of any species in a stand of poles or larger trees. So little older stand than our release treatments, primarily to improve composition and quality. So some examples, in an even age stand, this could include free thinning with the focus on removing poorer quality individuals. In an uneven age stand, this should happen each cutting cycle. You're tending, you're harvesting, and you're regenerating. This is the tending part, so you're removing poorer quality individuals. And what's considered a poorer quality individual is really going to just depend on your goals. So if your only goal is financials, you're probably going to remove this tree. However, if part of your goal is biodiversity, this is a pretty good looking tree and adds a lot of quality to your stand. So what are you removing? I mentioned this in class a few days ago about Minnesota having these best management practices. So what are the best management practices? Well, they're voluntary forest management guidelines designed to mitigate impacts to soil, water quality, wetlands, riparian areas, wildlife habitat, historic and cultural sites, and visual quality during activities such as timber harvesting. So what do the best management practices say about kind of these, what you should leave or what should go on during a timber harvest? During a timber harvest, they want you to retain all the snags that are possible. So you want to retain these things because they're important structurally, they're important for wildlife, they're important visually too, aesthetically. However, this really comes into call. These trees that are retained must be done so safely, so they can't impact the people on the ground, the loggers doing the harvesting. So if they do impact it, then they'll be removed. But again, generally, our best management practices, we want to retain all the snags. We also want to keep coarse woody debris. And again, best management practice, limit disturbance to this pre-existing coarse woody debris and create pieces of coarse woody debris. So these goals are best management. This is designed to improve the site and improve the site for many different objectives. So these are our best management practices. This is right from our forest management guidelines for Minnesota. So last kind of part of this intermediate treatments includes salvage and sanitation cut. So a salvage cut is the removal of dead trees or trees damaged or dying because of some kind of agent, some kind of disease, some kind of insect, some kind of something. So it's not happening because of competition. So this is not competition mortality. This is something else coming in and injuring the tree. So fire, insect, disease. And the goal is to recover economic value that would be otherwise lost. So why would you do this? One of them, very right in the definition, economics. So recovering economic value. Forest health. So some insects prefer to breed up in down or damaged wood. The example of spruce beetle. Spruce beetle is one example where very low populations start in these fallen down trees. Once those populations increase, they move to the live tree. So you may choose, if you have wind blow, you may choose to salvage those trees before you have an increasing population. Another example is also fire hazards. So just looking at some of these, here's mountain pine beetle impact, and interestingly enough, in areas of the West, some of this mountain pine beetle wood is really being sought after because of the how the beetle changes the wood. We also have an example of after a fire, you can salvage timber that was destroyed, that was burned in this example. So again, salvage is happening after the fact, after something. Whereas sanitation is the removal of trees to improve stand health by stopping or reducing the actual or anticipated spread of insects and disease. So this is the proactive removal. So something like EAB, that proactive removal of ash from certain areas before ash gets there. A very important part of this, salvage and sanitation cuts are not regeneration harvest. So these are intermediate treatments. The focus is not regeneration. After you did a salvage or after you did a sanitation cut, you would then need to go and assess the stand. Where are you at, and how do you get this regeneration? So that's really important. The goal of these two cuts is not to regenerate. It's to remove or be proactive about removing trees that will be damaged. So with that, this is the end of the intermediate treatment lecture. I will see you in class.